Welcome to David Galata Book Dreamer. I'm David Galata, and I'm dreaming up all my books. One of the reasons I call my YouTube page this is because that is where all of my books come from. They come from my dreams. Most of my dreams are quite lucid, but that's not today's topic. Today's topic is being topical, or rather, the hazards of being topical in your work. Now, some people really do like to put their favorite causes into their novels, and that's okay. You can do that, but there is a bit of a hazard of that, and that hazard is that over time, that is going to change. Not only might your opinions change, which means you'll probably end up being embarrassed by the work that you did before, or the times have changed so radically that people no longer understand the references you're talking about, or even worse, they don't care. That's a hazard. That's a danger. What I like to do is look at stories from a more universal point of view. I really like the idea of placing humanity in a thought experiment and seeing if we can look at how the human race will respond to certain occurrences and how we might overcome certain situations. Now, when you start getting into topical issues, you might lose sight of the fact that one, not everyone agrees with you. Two, you may have a lot of cultural imperatives that are in your work that you're not even aware of. And you might have some gain at the moment, but in the long run, you might really miss out. And there's the snare. If a topic that is currently hot is part of what you want to do in your books, what that ends up doing is it can make you some money right away. And that's great. There's nothing wrong with making money. I have no problems with people making money. Go ahead, knock yourself out. But if you want longevity, then you have to be a little more careful. If you are quoting today's politicians in your science fiction book that takes place 1,000 years from now, that's going to seem a little ridiculous. It is rare for us to actually quote anyone from 1,000 years ago. Now, it is true, sometimes we do quote certain famous figures like Roman emperors, philosophers. People still talk about Plato and Aristotle. There are certain uh, historical figures, kings and whatnot, who, you know, maybe had a good quip or a good quote that has remained relevant. But the reason that that quote has remained relevant is because those quotes are universal. They may not have much to do with what was going on at that time, but more of an observation on humanity itself. So when you're writing a book that is science fiction, but you really want to put a lot of current events into that book, you're going to have to jump through a lot of hoops, one, to make it work. And two, you're going to have to alter those things to fit your setting, unless you think 1,000 years from now, everything is going to be exactly like it is today. I put the odds at vanishingly small that that could ever occur. Think about what has happened just over the last 50 years, let alone 1,000. One of the reasons why some science fiction stories last is because they were not necessarily about what was happening in politics and society at the time that the book was written, but were more observations about the general state of humanity and how it might respond to new conditions. Those authors were able to get out of their own preconceived notions and step into something new. One of those authors is Isaac Asimov. In case you're wondering, well, who do you mean, Dave? This is who I mean. Isaac Asimov, his Foundation series. That culture was not based on the culture he grew up in. It was a culture based on what he felt certain technologies would lead to in the future. If you are looking at his robot series, again, there was more in his robot series, like iRobot, um, and the Bicentennial Man, which, if you've ever read that, you're going to know what I mean. He had so much more to say about the human condition than anything else. Most of the times in his robot stories where a robot breaks one of the three laws, it was usually because of human error. Arthur Clarke also followed along with that. We look at Larry Niven and his Ring World. His society, his human society in that book looks nothing like this one. It had very radically different. It wasn't like his time period. It isn't like it is now. And it's probably not going to look that way in 100 years, but maybe in 1,000, maybe. You could see where it could crop up this way. He was more interested in the repercussions of the ring world on a variety of societies in his world system. Greg Bear also usually avoids that, although he does put in a politician. And if you don't know who that politician is, you're gonna miss the joke. And that is why I'm speaking to you today about this. In his book, Eon, he mentions in his time period, Ralph Nader, who, is not as relevant today as he was when the book was written. And yet the book kind of assumed that he would remain very prominent. This has not occurred. And in about 50 years, people are going to read Eon and go, well, I don't know who that is, so I'm not sure why it's a funny situation. That's a hazard. That's a hazard. When we look at Gene Wolfe, we don't have these issues. Many times he borrows from the past and brings them forward into the future. Why? Litany of the Long Sun is a wonderful example of this because the culture in Litany of the Long Sun, which is a generation ship, is very much like Renaissance Europe, with some odd bits thrown in there. There's a little ancient Egypt tossed in there, and there's a little Victorian Gothic, stuff tossed in there, along with high tech. Gene Wolfe understood that human beings recycle fashions, they recycle architecture, they recycle ways of thinking. We keep rebuilding our culture and we keep recycling. There is very little that is new. Every now and then something unique occurs, but that usually requires unique circumstances for it to bloom. Now, there in and of itself is very rich ground for the science fiction author, but that means the author has to bring about a unique set of circumstances for unique cultural changes. I borrow from various cultures. I openly admit that, absolutely, because they worked well within my generation ship, Ganges. Because it fit in Ganges, I borrowed from those cultures. You borrow from things that are extant or from the past that might work in the future, but they will be changed. They will be altered. So I'm not saying that these are going to be true representations. Gene Wolfe did not make a true representation of Renaissance Europe in Litany of the Long Sun. No, what he said, what he did was he realized that when humanity forgot they were in a spaceship, they reverted back to earlier ways of doing things in order to survive. And that also led to some interesting issues and problems for the ship itself. When you have a good hand on the pulse of human behavior, then your work is going to last longer. Now, some people don't care about the longevity of their work. Um, Many people want it to be popular and topical so that they can make their money now and forget about it. That's fine. That's fine. But if you want your story to last longer, then you kind of need to take a lot of the topical stuff out of it. Or if you bring it into the book, you have to do it in a way that fits the setting and fits the experiment that you're doing with humanity. You know, we're doing a thought experiment. What if human beings could go faster than light? What if human beings were stuck in a spaceship for the next 10,000 years? You know, how might they evolve, devolve, change, mutate? These are thought experiments, and so those topics must also change and alter and mutate into new forms to match the setting that they're in, or they're not going to make sense. One of the reasons why Shakespeare is considered as timeless as he is, and let's face it, Shakespeare has been around for a very long time. Why? Because he really had a firm hand on the pulse of how human beings react and respond, how we treat each other, how we treat our world, how we treat everything, how we treat God, how we treat thoughts, how we think of dreams. These were all distilled into his works, which made them timeless. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, that is a bit of a goal. You know, it's going for the gold ring. Oh, there's a topical thing. Um, No one knows about that anymore, really. There used to be carousels that had gold and silver and bronze rings that you would lean over and reach for and grab. Getting the bronze ring was easiest. Getting the silver ring was more difficult, and you really had to work hard to get the gold ring. They don't do that anymore, but it was something they did long ago. It's an interesting metaphor. It's a shame that it's faded away, although it might return in a different form, in a very different kind of format. So when we look at our science fiction, and this is very, very much the case with science fiction, and you know, with fantasy, you can get away with more, but at the same time, let's be creative. You know, let's take something that you are really into topically and bring it into, you know, if it's a current way of thinking, can you morph that enough to fit into a fantasy world that has dragons and manticores and, you know, things like that? Can you do that? And if so, all right, go for it. But if not, you're going to have to move that aside. And I do see people make this error, and sometimes the books just fade away. They just fade away because no one gets it anymore. No one understands it anymore. There was too much in it that relied upon common knowledge of that time period in which the book was written. So if you want your books to last a little longer than, say, the next 20 years, try to avoid utilizing current events as a guideline for what you're going for. This doesn't mean that you can't put in elements of your favorite causes into your books. No one's saying that, but you're going to have to adjust them to fit the theme of your book, or it's going to fall flat, and it's not going to be universal. And be careful about assumptions. We make a lot of assumptions in this world. I make a lot of assumptions. Everybody does. And a lot of those assumptions, well, they ended up being proved wrong. I think a lot of our assumptions today will be proven wrong, even the ones we cling to the most. Yeah, yeah, at some point, they may be proven wrong. So have an open mind and try to go for the universal. So just a little piece of advice, that's all. Hope you have enjoyed this. Please do click the subscribe button. I've gotten a bunch of new subscribers, and I want to thank everyone who watched the last couple of videos and subscribed and comments. There were comments. I love answering comments, even negative ones. You'll notice I did indeed respond to negative comments as well as positive comments. I just want to hear from people. So thank you for watching and thank you for being here at David Galata Book Dreamer. And I hope to see you next week. So in the meantime, happy reading, everyone.